Welcome to Energy Frontier, the Wyoming Landscape Podcast. Hosted by Dr. Holly Krutka, Executive Director of the School of Energy Resources at the University of Wyoming. The show highlights SER's role supporting our mission to promote energy-driven economic development for the state of Wyoming.
So Caryn, thank you so much for being here today. So our interview focus today is Caryn Campbell. She's Director of Operations for Enbridge's Southwest region. In this role, Caryn is responsible for the safe and reliable operations of pipeline and terminal assets across 7 states, including Wyoming. So Caryn, let's start our podcast today and our conversation by having you tell our listeners about your background and how you came to work at Enbridge as well as your role there.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate being here. So, a little bit about my background. I am a civil engineer, completed my undergraduate at the University of Manitoba in Canada. And through that, as an engineer, started my career in natural gas distribution and worked at a company there for a little bit, and then relocated to Alberta, which is kind of the oil and gas capital of Canada. And through there was able to work both in oil companies, and then moved into a natural gas transmission company called Alliance Pipeline. Alliance Pipeline was a 50-50 joint venture with Enbridge and another company, and operated as an independent company until 2018, at which point all of the operation assets went over to Enbridge, and all of the commercial and financial went over to another company. So that's how I ended up at Enbridge, was I was part of that acquisition.
Very cool. Okay. Yeah. So Enbridge has a broad energy portfolio. It includes pipelines, renewable energy, and gas utilities, including storage. It'd be great for our listeners if you could give us an overview of those businesses and any new technologies the company is working to advance.
Yeah, for sure. So Enbridge is North America's largest energy company. So around 30% of the nation's oil is moved through our pipelines on any given day. Enbridge is the largest conduit of oil into the U.S. As well, around 20% of the nation's natural gas moves through our pipelines. And with our recent acquisition of Dominion Energy's natural gas utilities, Enbridge is the largest gas utility by volume in North America and the 3rd largest by customer count. In the Gulf Coast, Enbridge serves about 15% of the LNG export capacity, and that's expected to double by 2030. And then we're into renewable energy. So we have 23 wind farms, 15 solar, 1 geothermal project, and then more renewable projects in development. As well, we have offshore wind farms in Europe. We also own 10% of a company called Divert. It's a company that takes food waste and converts it into natural gas, and it just opened a new facility in Longview, Washington. And then carbon and CCS. In Canada, Enbridge and local Indigenous partners are developing the open access Wabamun Carbon Hub near Edmonton, Alberta, to support carbon capture projects. In the U.S., Enbridge and partners are developing a CO2 pipeline transportation and sequestration hub near Corpus Christi, and there's more to come.
And I definitely want to ask a little bit about carbon storage and really the transportation of carbon in a minute. But first, let's talk about the operations that you have now in Wyoming. Enbridge operates a 785-mile express pipeline, and that goes through Wyoming. Tell us about that pipeline. Where does it originate? What is it transporting? Where does it terminate? What should we know about that pipeline?
Yeah, that pipeline, it originates in Hardisty, Alberta, so in Canada. And we have tankage facilities in Buffalo, Montana. We've got 10 tanks, or 1.44 million barrels of storage. And Edgar, Montana, 2 tanks and 240,000 barrels of storage. So that pipeline then continues on through into Wyoming, and it terminates in Casper, Wyoming. We have a tankage facility in Casper, 12 tanks, or about 1.43 million barrels of storage. Overall, that pipeline has a capacity of 310,000 barrels per day, and it transports oil.
Very cool. And Enbridge also operates the 933-mile Platte pipeline that starts in Casper. What should we know about that one?
Yeah, the Platte pipeline originates in Casper, Wyoming, and it terminates in Wood River, Illinois. So it traverses through Wyoming, Nebraska, Kansas, Missouri, and then into Illinois. It's 164,000 barrel per day capacity from Casper to Guernsey. And we have tankage facilities in Guernsey. 5 tanks are around 405,000 barrels. and then 145,000 barrel per day capacity from Guernsey into Wood River, Illinois.
Very cool. Are there any projects or future projects Enbridge has planned in Wyoming?
I think first and foremost, it's the continued safe and efficient operation of the Express Platte pipeline and the tankage facilities in Casper and Guernsey. Enbridge is also looking at renewable project opportunities, including a solar facility in Cheyenne that's tied to significant economic development. The recent acquisition of Dominion Energy's natural gas utilities includes Questar Natural Gas in southwest Wyoming, so that's Lincoln, Oneida, and Sweetwater counties. And it also includes the natural gas production company Wexpro. Wyoming is an important state for Enbridge. The all-of-the-above energy policy approach fits well with Enbridge's approach.
Very cool. So you have a rather large footprint in the state of Wyoming and across North America. One of the things, there's been increased discussion in Wyoming and really the country about pipeline safety. And I think that's coming from new industries that are starting to emerge. So as folks talk about carbon capture, use, and storage, we already have a CO2 pipeline in Wyoming. It's been there a long time. It serves our enhanced oil recovery industry. There's also discussion of an emerging hydrogen industry. All these are going to take increased transportation. So can you talk about pipeline safety? What goes into that? What should the everyday person that's not in the pipeline industry know about pipeline safety?
Yeah, for sure. I think with Enbridge, safety is our number one priority, and it's really the foundation of our business. And when we look at our pipelines, they're constructed using the highest quality materials, the highest standards of construction. And we look at it from the aspect of prevention is what is critical. So we are continually inspecting our pipelines. We use advanced imaging technology, which is really similar to MRI, to run tools down our lines to look and see if there's any small features that may turn into something so that we can address that and we can fix it before it becomes critical.
So that's a regular practice that you're doing all the time around your system. And so you're looking in a preventative way.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. It's a regular practice, and we will routinely take a look and analyze the data and then see. And then from that data, we will sometimes come up with preventative maintenance digs where we'll go in and we'll see, hey, this is what we're seeing in the data. Let's take a look and let's validate what we're seeing and see if this is truly what's there. And so we'll do those maintenance digs. We'll open it up. We'll take a look at the line. We'll, again, use additional technologies similar to like ultrasound to take a look and check the condition of the pipe. We check the coating that's on the pipe. And we're just really making sure that the pipe is continuing to be in the best condition possible to ensure the safe operations. And that's ongoing as part of our maintenance as well. And then we have monitoring. So we're continually monitoring our pipeline 24/7, 365 days a year. We have ongoing monitoring that is monitored out of our control center, where we're continually watching and making sure that everything's exactly as it appears to be. And we have state-of-the-art leak detection technology. And in terms of preventative, one of the things that we do is if something doesn't seem right, we'll stop and then we'll send someone out to check and see. So we're always looking at it from that perspective of ensuring that we're continuing to operate safely. And then when we need to, getting the boots on the ground to take a look and see what's going on. As well, eyes in the sky, boots on the ground. We continually are flying over our pipelines, doing pipeline monitoring, making sure that there's nothing abnormal there. Also making sure that nobody's gone and built something on the pipeline right of way that shouldn't be there. And then boots on the ground, making sure that we have great stakeholder outreach, that our maintenance teams are out there, that our stakeholders are aware that our lines are there. And often we'll have if the stakeholders see something that's not right, they'll call into us so that we can go out and take a look at it. So it really is a concerted effort with everyone to ensure that we continually safely operate these pipelines.
Have you ever had anyone build something on your pipeline easement that they weren't supposed to?
Yes, I would say, I think maybe it's sometimes individuals aren't aware that the easement is there. And I think that that's what you see is that people are not aware. They haven't done their research and they've, potentially built something. And then we'll have to go out and we'll find it and we'll work with them to get it relocated off and ensure that it's safe. And that is often, it's not that we don't want the building, it's that we want to ensure that it's located in a way that is ensuring the safety of the public.
Right. That makes sense. So understanding that there are these new industries emerging, like carbon capture, use and storage, they are going to require some transportation. Enbridge is a company with a long history of operating pipelines. Do you have concerns about these new industries, or do you feel like it will take a different approach, but it can be safe? I mean, what is your overall thought on launching new industries like widespread carbon capture and storage or hydrogen?
I don't have concerns. I believe that even with looking at the commodity within the pipe, recognizing that it may take slightly different materials or slightly different approach to how they're constructing it, but going back to those engineering fundamentals and those principles, I believe that those pipelines will be safely constructed and safely operated to enable the expansion of the industry.
Exactly. And I think that's the right word, expansion.
Yeah.
We already have a CCUS industry here in Wyoming. So we're talking about making that more robust, extending to other states, and really making it a large-scale industry. And for us here at the School of Energy Resources, we want to make sure that grows in a way that's going to benefit the state of Wyoming. So that's our focus. Yeah. So appreciate your perspective. So we're going to pivot a little bit. So you just gave an incredible leadership talk at our Distinguished Speaker Series. It's different than what we normally have. We often have technical speakers or really a focus on the energy sector, but you made a very impassioned plea for folks in the STEM fields to look at leadership and what it takes. And I think one of the things that you did a really good job of is highlighting some of the challenges that folks in STEM have as they move into leadership opportunities. So one of those, for example, is if you're a very math-focused person, for example, your answers are right or wrong for your education, for your career, and that's not leadership, right? It's really hard to have black and white in leadership. So can you talk about how did you get passionate about this space and talk a little bit about your journey into a leadership role?
Yeah, for sure. So how did I get passionate about it? I think my passion stemmed from my own initial failed attempts in leadership and realizing that what I thought was going to be something really easy and natural was actually a lot of hard work. And realizing that if I wasn't going to put the dedicated time and effort into growing a different skill set, I was not going to be a successful leader. And I think that that's something that doesn't get talked about enough, especially when you're coming out of the STEM field. You go through your school, you finish, you're really good technically and you're really strong technically. And you actually, I know I spent the first 4 years of my career really focusing on being super technically strong. And then the natural progression was you're really technically strong, go lead, with no introduction to any sort of leadership skills. And it's no wonder that my first leadership role was an epic failure. And as someone who wants to succeed, I first thought, well, maybe I'm not doing leadership. But then I stepped back and was like, okay, how can I look at this and see what do I need to do to grow and improve? And how do I need to change things? And that really took me on a very long and it's continued journey on how to truly be a great leader. And it's become a passion of mine now is, how can I be a great leader? How can I help empower others to be great leaders? And, giving the talk, it was the idea of everyone needs to go on their own journey. Everyone needs to make their own mistakes. Everyone needs to figure things out on their own. But maybe there's like one or two things that I might say that maybe would shorten the journey for someone. Or maybe when they have their first leadership role and it doesn't go quite the way that they thought, their initial thing won't be to say, I'm done with leadership. That's it for me. But to maybe look and be like, okay, what could I do differently here?
I think the other thing that folks coming from a STEM background, they're expected to be individual contributors. You're trained to get the answers right. And there's big implications if you don't, right? Mm-hmm. Especially in engineering or science. So I think it's a difficult transition for a lot of folks. But there's also, this is something that we talked about in the Q&A part of your talk, that there's a lot of value of having folks coming from a STEM background, stepping into leadership roles. It's not super common, but there's a lot of value. Can you talk about your perspective on that and why you feel like folks from a STEM background can contribute into these leadership roles?
I think when you look at a leadership team, the best leadership teams are super well-rounded. They've got individuals that all have a diverse background, diverse experience, diverse skill sets. And I really think that that is what helps make a leadership team great. And so having individuals with that STEM background to embrace the leadership skills and actually go into leadership, I think continues to strengthen the overarching leadership. And I think that when you have different people in your team with different backgrounds, you're able to really bounce ideas off of each other and really hope. So if you have, people with a good financial background, they're focusing on the financial side. You get individuals with a strong technical background, they may be bringing a different aspect to it, looking at the technical side and being like, okay, how can we make this better? And I just think combined, that really helps better the mission of the whole.
Totally agree. And so you picked out some of the most important traits for leadership. I think you had 10 and you picked out a few. It wasn't one of the traits, but one of the different areas you talked about was how leaders need to understand it's not about you. And that can be hard for people to accept, but I think it's probably one of the most important ones. Can you talk about which traits you also highlighted in your presentation as particularly important for you?
I think the main points that I wanted everyone to walk away from the presentation with were, there was 4 different things that were really helpful to me as I made that technical leadership transition. The first one being that leadership is a choice. It's a choice that you need to make, and you need to decide if leadership is something that is right for you. And it's kind of, I called it a big D decision. It's not something you can casually just kind of fall into. I mean, you could, but you're probably not going to be the greatest leader. So if you want to be great, you have to make that choice. And it's something you need to choose to do every day. The next one, leadership is not about you. That one's a hard one. I know my first leadership, I was like, cool, I'm going to be a leader. Everyone's going to listen to me and do what I tell them to do. That didn't work.
Which is also not leadership.
That's not leadership. Didn't know about it at the time, but also didn't work. And I think that part of that was when I realized that my job there is to make stars out of everyone on my team. That's a leader. My job is to inspire them to achieve great things. And that can be, it was at first a little hard to kind of wrap my head around. But then once I did and I started to see my team succeed, I was so excited for them. And so that was the next one. Leadership's a skill set that requires active development. And I said it in the presentation, and this really kind of hit home for me was I spent 4 years getting an engineering degree, and then I was just going to be a leader. Leadership there's enough in there for a 4-year degree as well. And so without going in there and recognizing that it's a skill set and you have to actively develop it and you have to continually be able to self-reflect and see where you need to grow and see where you need to go to get better, that's a key thing in leadership. And then the last one, which was a hard one for me to wrap my head around, leadership is both a science and an art. So when I first really became super serious about leadership, and I was like, oh, there's a science, leadership and neuroscience. How does the brain work in leadership? This is great. And I was right down that rabbit hole because I'm a scientist. And then I realized that you throw people in the mix and the science doesn't work anymore. And that's kind of where that blend of art comes in, is that you have the science, and it's great to understand the science and really understand how the brain works and how leadership works. But you have to be able to be flexible enough to understand and work in the gray and understand that when you're dealing with people, everything goes out the window. People are humans. They come with their own set of beliefs, values, emotions, and that could change on any given day. And I think that that's part of it, is that you have to be able to kind of live in that science, but then also in the art space as well.
Yeah. And that training, I would say our College of Engineering and Physical Sciences here has been trying to push out some of this. And actually attending your presentation today was the dean, Egan-Wright, and he just absolutely loved your talk. And I think those 4 things that you've mentioned, they're really important. The second one, that leadership is not about you, and understanding you don't have to prove yourself. that is probably the biggest pitfall for any new leader. And, there might be people who are wondering, how did you get there? But that is not your job to prove that you belong there. Your job is to lead. Yeah. And I think that's probably something almost all of us will stumble a little bit as we move into these leadership roles. So really appreciate you bringing that out. So talk about the 10 principles that make a good leader great.
Yeah. And, I did take them from the World Economic Forum. It was something that I looked into, and it was kind of in the next little while. These are the principles that they believe are going to make good leadership great. And so the first one is to have integrity, and integrity in everything that you do, and, communicative. So as a leader, communicate. And that was something for me that I learned, is that over-communicate. You may think you're over-communicating, but to some, that's just the perfect level of communication. And people can't read your mind. I do joke with my team sometimes that I would love it if they could read my mind. It would make my life really easy, but it's just not going to happen. So communicate. Feedback positive, that's one that I touched on. And that is, as a leader, you need to be okay with receiving feedback. And I think that is a skill, is to learn to be okay with receiving feedback. And you have to be okay with giving feedback. And giving feedback is so important, because when you give people feedback, you're giving them choices.
And how you give them feedback. You have to understand, especially for high performers, they're going to hear, if you give them 5 compliments and 1 constructive thing, they hear the 1. But they deserve to hear the 1, right? As you pointed out, you're giving them the choice if they want to work on that, or quite frankly, is that really something they need to work on? We don't know everything. And so you always have to weigh that, but that you're willing to be open with your team and do your part to help them grow or see your perspective on things, I think that was really valuable. So it is a tough thing, and sugarcoating does not do the job, because the message doesn't get across. So
no, and I've been guilty of sugarcoating numerous times, because I don't want to hurt people's feelings.
We all have.
Yeah. But then by not hurting someone's feelings, you're taking away their choice. And now they don't have the ability to choose to do things differently.
Yep.
The next one, resilience. As a leader, you have to be resilient. And I think that goes, without saying. There has been numerous times in my career where I've, you want to kind of say, okay, I'm done. But when you realize you're there for your team and it's not about you, you need to be resilient and remember who you're serving, which is your team, and pick up and move forward. Self-belief. You have to believe in yourself. And that was something that has taken me time to learn to do, to believe that I am a good leader. Vision. So have that vision. And I'm not talking about like a corporate vision. Yes, corporate vision is very important when you work at a company, but a vision for what do you want your team to look like? How do you want your team to function? What is important to you as a leader, and what is important for the culture of your team? And then communicate that vision out so that your team knows what it is.
Yeah. As a leader, the bigger your team gets, one of the only things you get to really impact is culture, right? But you can set that bar. You can't do the work anymore, which is, again, I think often hard for anyone, especially those in STEM, because you're going to have an opinion on everything technical. But you don't get to do that. But you can set the culture in which that work is done. I love that. Okay, what else is on your list?
Emotional intelligence.
It's a natural for engineers then.
Yeah, that's supernatural. That's...
I think they teach it right there with thermodynamics.
Yeah, I think it is. Isn't it thermodynamics and
second half of the
intelligence? And that I think that's a skill that has not been taught, and it's a skill that can be developed, and I would argue is probably an essential skill, not only to leadership but to just being part of a team and functioning in the working world. But it's something like it. It is definitely, it requires work for emotional intelligence to be able to be aware of your own emotions and regulate your own emotions. And then also to be able to be perceptive of others' emotions and maybe adjust your behavior accordingly. Like, that can be a lot.
Yeah.
And one of the things I touched on is that studies have shown that emotional intelligence is 2 times as important as intellectual intelligence.
Oh, yeah.
So that is really big. And like with the engineers, and I think I mentioned this, is that, when I came out of school, everyone's like, engineers have bad social skills. Engineers have no social skills. Well, no, engineers have lots of social skills, but maybe we could focus on the emotional intelligence a little bit.
Yeah.
Networking networking being a really valuable thing. And when I first kind of started hearing about networking, I was like, oh, I don't want to go out and have to talk to people all the time about everything. Like this is, but where I've found networking to be super valuable is that if I have someone on my team who comes to me and they're like, hey, I'm interested in this. Well, if I've done the networking, then I know who I can connect them with so that they can learn something and be successful on it. So that's where I look to the real value of networking, is that when I'm networking, like, what's the purpose? And for me, a lot of the times the purpose is to be able to connect my team and help my team grow, or, to reach out to somebody and be able to learn something that can then help my team. So mentorship. I'm very big on mentorship. I had a lot of really great mentors early in my career that truly helped me get to where I am today. And now I'm fortunate that I'm able to pay that forward. And I'm a mentor to a lot of individuals, a lot of females in STEM, and some men as well. And I definitely have a thing. If someone reaches out to me to ask to be a mentor, I will definitely meet with them and find out what they're interested in.
Great.
And then the last one was purposeful. So just be purposeful in what you're deciding, be purposeful in what you roll out to your team. I have worked with leaders that are like, hey, let's go chase this. Let's go chase that. Let's move everywhere.
Yep.
And the benefit or the importance of being purposeful and being thoughtful about what you want to do, and then helping set your team up for success.
Exactly. You have to connect that dot between this is something we want to do and can we actually do it? And the answer might be yes, but you can't look at it in a vacuum because you have so many other things going on. And I think that's one thing our leadership team here at the School of Energy Resources, we're working on. We want to do everything. And we can't, but we have a lot of great opportunities. So what would you suggest for someone in a STEM field or any field who's interested in learning more about leadership? And it's really, even if you're not in a leadership role, it's not too early. It does take a long time. If that's something you'd like to do, what would you suggest? How would you start in your career if you think you might want to move into a leadership role?
I mean, I think just with the internet and everything, there's so many great resources out there that you can just, there's so many resources that you can read and articles. Like, I mean, you Google leadership and there's so much that comes up. So, I mean, definitely investing in just reading and listening. But I also think that look around and, if you're in the STEM field, look around and is there a professor that you see leadership skills and you admire? Is there, a graduate student or someone like that? And reach out to them. Ask them, hey, like, how did you get into leadership? I see this. Like, tell me a little bit about it. And just start asking those questions. And then, from that, if that's something you seriously are interested in, there are so many great training courses out there that you can invest in and enroll in and take a look at. There's even some free. My big thing is, as you read books and do that, is there will be leadership tidbits and takeaways. And what I've heard people say, they're like, well, I read this book. And I'm like, okay, but what did you implement from it? So I always challenge people when they learn something new, figure out what you can implement from it. And then take it away and implement it and try it out and see if it works. It may not work for you, and be willing to try that and take those steps forward. And I think that, that really helps as you start to kind of go down that leadership path. And of course, focus on emotional intelligence. That's always something ongoing.
Exactly. And one thing I don't think you've mentioned yet, but is a critical part of leadership and something you mentioned during your talk is the need to be vulnerable. What does that mean? Why is it important? How does that embodied?
Okay, so vulnerability, that was something I really had to learn. And the ability to admit when you're not right, the ability to admit when you need help, the ability to take a look at what you've done and potentially go back and recalibrate and do it differently. I think those are all really important skill sets as a leader. And I think that when I went into leadership, I was not willing to be vulnerable because I thought that I had to be right. If you're going to lead, you have to be right. You can't, admitting that there's an error is a bit of a weakness. And that didn't help me in any way, shape, or form. So it definitely is like a little muscle that had to grow, and I had to be able to start being comfortable with being like, hey, I thought I did this correctly and I didn't. And this was my error. And this was the impact I saw, and this is what I'll do differently. Or sitting in front of my team and being like, I don't know. let's work through this together, and let's see if we can come up with the right questions or the right answers. And I think that is just so important as a leader, because it builds trust. It helps build relationships. It helps your team understand that you're human, because you are. And I really think it helps build a stronger team too, because you can start to see that, hey, this is a safe place that we can make mistakes. This is a safe place for us to learn. This is a safe place for us to grow. And I think those are some of the best functioning teams, where you've got that psychological safety and that ability to grow as a team and learn from our mistakes and figure out how to do things better. And I think it starts with the leader being able to stand up there and say, hey, I've made these errors. Let's work through this.
I totally agree. I think the other thing that you get out of being vulnerable is your team knows that you know you're not perfect and that you make mistakes. And so if they have a concern, they're going to be more likely to air it before something happens. Because they're like, she knows she's not always right. She's going to hear me out. And you have to create that open space for them to say that. But I think that can save a lot of problems. So is there anything else you'd like to share on leadership, or your thoughts on leadership in STEM in general?
I think my thing was that, like, as a leader, you have the ability to be such a strong impact in someone's world, or a leader is that force of change in someone's world. It can inspire people to achieve great things. And I think that when you take on a leadership role, if you keep that in mind and you realize, there is responsibility in being a leader. And if you can move forward and grow and learn and develop, you're going to set up the stage for having a fantastic team that is going to be able to learn and grow and develop under you. And I think that is such a powerful thing. And for me, that has been the greatest reward, is when I see my teammates succeed.
Well said. So I hope that inspires the current or future generation of energy leaders to really invest in themselves, we took quite a turn there from pipelines, but it's important. We won't have the leaders of tomorrow if we don't develop them today. So that's why we're really grateful for your time and your thoughts on this, and, what opportunities we can implement here at the University of Wyoming. So as a last question, we'd like to let our listeners learn a little bit more about our podcast guests. What is your favorite place to visit in Wyoming?
My favorite place in Wyoming, I would say that, and full disclosure, my first time in Wyoming was about 1.5 years ago, when I took my new job and drove up from Denver up to Casper, and I was blown away by the beauty of the drive. And that continued on when my husband and I packed up our vehicle and drove south, and we drove through Wyoming. And as we drove through Wyoming, he was like, this place is beautiful. We need to come back. So right now I've had the opportunity to spend time with my team in Casper, which it's beautiful there. And now this is my first time in Laramie, and driving in here and just seeing Laramie and seeing the location with the mountains, and just, it is absolutely beautiful. So I can't wait for the opportunity to get back to Wyoming and do some mountain biking. My husband and I definitely want to get back here, do some mountain biking, do some hiking, potentially head up to do some snow skiing when we're ready to face the snow again. We're thinking, we've got friends that go up to Jackson Hole, so that's definitely something. So I'm looking forward to the opportunity to explore Wyoming a lot more now that I'm in this role and part of my team is based here. There's been lots of really cool opportunities.
Well, you're always welcome in Laramie. Today we have a rainy day with no wind, so that's slightly atypical for us here. Usually it's never rains and it's always windy, but you're welcome anytime. And we really appreciate your time here on the podcast and for visiting us here at the University of Wyoming. So thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been great.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Energy Frontier, the Wyoming Landscape, the podcast that highlights the School of Energy Resources at the University of Wyoming. You can expect a new episode of Energy Frontier every Wednesday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. See you next time.